I'm on my way to brother Harai and sister-in-law Gariner's place for dinner, and I want to talk about the concept of sovereignty or the formation of states, and that's because I've finished reading a few days ago the James C. Scott book Against the Grain. Now, it's a very beautifully written book, very easy to read, short paragraphs, all of them meaty, everything kind of builds up in his writing to get to a point which then builds to another point. So it's not a book that you drown in details. I do like history books where I'm drowning in details, but this one is very conceptual, and that part of the reason is because Scott approaches the subject admittedly, and he says it at the beginning in the introduction, as a generalist, but a very well-read generalist, and with some very original theories which have been praised in all of the blurb notes by people like Cunliffe, who I just adore, who is an English archaeologist. Anyway, getting to the meat of it now. So the essential argument that Scott has is that the entire conception of development of humans once they came out of Africa and populated in other regions, that idea that there was firstly the development of things like animal husbandry, the looking after of animals, livestock, and was also the development of agriculture, that these did not naturally result in the next stage, which has been historically the argument of civilization, meaning building urban environments, towns and villages first, towns and then cities. What he noted in the book was that he was astonished that there was this 4,000 year gap. This 4,000 year gap between the first evidence of agriculture and to an extent animal husbandry, and only 4,000 years later do we see in what he calls the southern alluvium, meaning the southern area of Mesopotamia, he notices the emergence of the higher levels of density of human beings. So there's this 4,000 year gap. Now what that then leads him to argue is that humans chose not to become agriculturalists immediately. And so one of the big themes of the book is that agriculture is really hard labor. And it's hard labor in that it follows the dictum of the seasons. You sow, you reap, you sow, you reap. Whereas if you're a hunter-gatherer, you are, to use his analogy, working to more of a tempo, meaning you eat when there is things to eat, and sometimes you go out, I guess, and hunt more, and sometimes you hunt less. He points out that the diet of the hunter-gatherers is, across history, far more varied in both vegetables and meats than the agriculturalists. Now, he makes this extraordinary observation of how early empires across the planet were very much dependent upon and based upon the growing of grain. Now, why is that so? Well, he contrasts that, for example, with regions of the world where potatoes or taro or yams, other tubers were grown. And he notes that those never built any sense of empire-like status. And the point he makes is that there are certain features of grain which lend themselves to the formation of hierarchy and states, and the segmentation or the specialization of human beings, and one of those features of grain is that it's infinitely divisible. And equal portions of it can be given to people. Whereas if you hunt a piece of meat, not only do you have to divide it up immediately, but dividing up equal portions is a little bit more complicated. So in Mesopotamia, he notes that there are all these bowls, very cheaply made bowls from pottery, which are all identical in terms of their height and their depth and their volume, which is suggestive of the fact that they were used to pay equally various labourers for their labour in grain. Now, the main grains in Mesopotamia were, of course, wheat and barley, and there were many others, but they were the main ones. Over in China, it was rice, which in itself is building a grain empire. So this question of building a society or a state on grain is now coming to the meat of the point. So in order to get value out of soil from grain, he notes that you need a pretty large labour force. You need them dedicated. To an extent, these people in time, from the evidence, provide what he calls unfree labour. Rough synonyms of unfree labour, or not antonyms, but somewhere between an antonym and a synonym, are words like bondage. To the other extreme, there's words like slavery. So humans in these highly urbanized regions of southern Mesopotamia, where the grain cultures first are in evidence, and we're talking round figures 3000 BC. So in 3000 BC, we have an enormous amount of evidence, as he points out, about the town known as Uruk, U-R-U-K. Uruk is particularly famous and dearly loved by me because it is the place where the Epic of Gilgamesh is grounded as a tale, and there is evidence that Gilgamesh was a real person. So Uruk, as an example of one of these early settlements, involves something that we didn't see before, and that is the building of walls around the town. In fact, in the beginning of the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is this remarkable opening where Gilgamesh is walking on the walls of the town. These are the exterior walls, and he's sort of making a soliloquy in a way. As a narrator, he's sort of saying, "Why am I not sufficiently loved? You know, I've participated in the building of these enormous walls. How come people don't love me so much?" So why were these walls there? So one of the things that James C. Scott notes that again is extraordinary is, okay, whether it's the Chinese wall, the Great Wall of China, or it is a lot of these walled regions in Mesopotamia. Some of them weren't walled around just towns or cities. Some of them were actually walled across a landscape. He notes that many commentators have said that these walls weren't just there to necessarily keep out the other, they're also to keep in the people. The agriculture-based, agrarian, grain-based people, elites, depended on labour in order to extract value from the soil. These highly dense populations, which could be anywhere up to, say, 10, 20, 30,000 people per region or town, clearly they had to have some form of reliable, regular source of food, unlike the hunter-gatherer situation where you would have smaller groups and they would wander over different areas. Now, these walls then appear, and the walls are also there, of course, because there is raiding going on. And when I was reading about the raiding, whether raiding by non-sedentary people, non-stationary people, non-town dwellers, or raiding by other towns. But when I was reading about the raiding, I remembered a moment that for me is unforgettable, and that was that in 1989, I remember it so clearly. In 1989, when I was starting my journey of trying to understand actually Armenian history and situate it within some sort of framework or historical timeline, I was developing a timeline, and in that timeline, I ended up reading a lot about Mesopotamia because it's a culture that is somewhat before the first reference is made to Armenians. And I remember it was a Saturday evening, and on this note I'm kind of like going to end this little story, but you'll get the drift of it as to where we're going. On this Saturday night, and it was in the middle of winter, so it was rather cold, and I was at home in my bedroom reading about Mesopotamia, and time passed as I was reading, and then at a very specific moment I remember feeling these chills going through my body, because I realized that I had just read about the first emergence of war in human civilization. I mean, if that's not a chilling thought, I don't know what is. And those wars were people who were navigating up and down either the Tigris or Euphrates River, attacking other towns in order to get to their grain stores. So the nub then of the formation of states in these urbanized areas is that people had to be subjugated. And I haven't mentioned the degree to which slavery was evident, because often when there were these wars, what was brought back and considered to be the most valuable thing that you could bring back from a war was slaves. And the slaves were often women, because women had the advantage for the elite of being able to create more labour and themselves be labour as well. So a lot of the books that I've been reading lately have vastly deepened my understanding of the prevalence of slavery across human history up until very recent times, 19th century. So the presence of slavery in history has made me lean towards anarchism. I have started to understand how it is that essentially the formation of states, the bringing together of human beings into urban environments, has created a situation of dependence, of bondage. And I look at our lives in the present world, and I think of them having these characteristics: people paying mortgages for exorbitantly priced houses, or people paying rent or being rent payers for their entire life, or younger people thinking about the fact that they'll never be able to afford housing. I mean, we are in an absurd situation where the economic order has been structured in such a way to maintain servitude for specific elites. And that, my friends, is just a reminder of what was present in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. And I've now arrived at my brother's place, so I will park and bid you adieu.